four most common ways to make alcohol-free beer is steam distillation, reverse osmosis, water vapor, or gas stripping.
Gas stripping.
Warning, this podcast contains violence, sexuality, gore, and other horrible and disturbing things. Listener discretion is advised. Also, the hosts of this venture are ignorant dipshits, so please do not take anything they say as fact. And enjoy the show.
Now, are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then we'll begin.
Today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be.
It is our basic human right to be fuck-up.
A second plane now has crashed into the other tower of the World Trade Center.
Putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
The defendant shall be incarcerated for the rest of her natural life with no possibility of parole.
You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men.
We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold.
Occultae Veritatis.
Hello, occultists, and welcome back to Occultae Veritatis podcast. My name is Don Kessler, along with
Don Kessler.
Don Kessler.
Don Kessler.
Don Kessler.
Don Kessler.
Okay, so actually I'm
and Don Kessler.
I'm Leon Filger, along with
Dave Murray.
Richard Bigley, I guess.
I'm still Don Kessler, actually.
Yeah, I don't want to give up Don Kessler.
I don't want to give up Don Kessler either. I thought we had to.
Okay, no.
Don Kessler's not giving up on you guys, though. Thank you, Don Kessler.
Okay, so today's episode is taken from the real life of someone I know who works in long-term care and has identified some problems therein and has decided to take it upon themselves to fix them. Accordingly, they've created a PowerPoint presentation that they have already delivered to 3 members of the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan and will soon be presenting to the Minister of Health. That's what today's episode is about. But first, we need some poison because this is heavy. And for our poison, as I'm a recovering alcoholic celebrating my 2 years of sobriety 3 days ago, thank you very much, we're going for Beck's non-alcoholic. So let's pass them around.
So, what's your poison?
Did they take the alcohol out with a chemical process? How do they do that exactly?
They drink it all out first.
Oh, I see. Like they just a layer of scum on top?
No, it's separate. Yeah, they're the ones drinking the alcohol out.
I see.
Yeah. I put it in the centrifuge, and they take the alcohol layer and then put it into the hand sanitizer bags.
I see.
Yeah.
I'd believe that.
That doesn't sound right, but I don't know enough about stars to dispute it.
I just made that up. I don't know if that actually happens.
Watching LEB struggle with this can opener is so entertaining. Come on.
Twist off only. That's the whole
there
point,
you go.
You know? You don't have to struggle like that.
The 4 most common ways to make alcohol-free beer is steam distillation, reverse osmosis, water vapor, or gas stripping.
Gas stripping.
Somebody gave all our strippers burritos.
Okay, so that's how they spin around the pole so fast. It's jet powered, you know.
As far as non-alcoholic beers go, I really quite enjoy this one, as it is a fairly accurate facsimile of the original.
Yeah, this is a good quality non-alcoholic beer. I mean, I've had some beers that are non-alcoholic that have just been like absolute, just awful. Like the Co-op non-alcoholic beer, don't recommend that one.
It tastes like beer.
I'll finish it for you if you don't want it.
That's what she said.
So yeah, I'm going to rate this beer Bremen times 3 to the 32nd power out of Bavaria to the 9th power.
You're just reading the bottle, aren't you?
I'm reading the bottle and adding math. Yeah.
Okay.
X equals negative B plus or minus root B squared minus 4AC over 2A out of 10.
Why did you just bring up my 10th grade math like that?
Negative B plus or minus square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A.
Well, you see, I rate this beer A squared plus B squared equals C squared.
Don't be obtuse.
That's
or
fair.
Acute.
I am a cutie. You are right.
Mm-hmm. I rate this beer 7 out of 10 because I like the non-alcoholic Coronas better.
I rate this beer, they messed up math when they added letters into it, but
yeah,
otherwise, enjoyable.
I rate this beer the second least favorite childhood Hans Christian Andersen tale belonging to the book.
I'm going to give the 5.
What?
It's cold and it's liquid.
Yeah.
I'm just going to give it a 5.
That's like plus a zillion, so it is cold and it's liquid.
If it had alcohol in it, like this is the kind of beer I'd like, because I like beers that barely taste like beers. And this is along those lines. So like I think if it had alcohol in it, I'd give it a 7. But this is just cold, bubbly, and pleasant, so I'm going to give it a 5.
So it's like a beer Kool-Aid for you then?
Yeah, pretty much.
A beer Kool-Aid,
It's a
okay.
bitter beer Kool-Aid.
Fun fact, Bex says, they brew a standard beer, then gently remove the alcohol after fermentation.
Gently, just like here,
Yeah,
alcohol,
just like-
alcohol.
Just the most gentle.
Just gentle caress of
Go, baby.
Oh, I made the puppy excited.
They dip a strip of velvet into the keg. And
Light some candles.
Just super soft, like silk, you know.
Okay, has everyone rated the beer?
Yes.
Okay, let's get started with the episode.
A new study from Rush University Medical Center has revealed LGBTQ+ residents in long-term care are concerned about healthcare discrimination.
You have to face facts. Yeah, nobody gets out of here alive.
So I think we're actually at the best time we have been in the history of this conversation about how to address the housing needs of LGBTQ folks.
He said, oh no, we don't have any of those. I mean, it was really, oh no, we don't have any of those here. And I thought, really?
So some type of standard national training might be a concrete policy objective, but in terms of things such as ensuring that there are LGBTQ safe spaces in existing facilities is also important.
In long-term care settings, LGBTQ+ older adults are forced to navigate a healthcare system that assumes heterosexuality and gender conformity amongst providers who are poorly trained to care for their specific needs.
When I heard this story, I just thought to myself, why isn't this training already being done? Like medical students and, recent graduate doctors and stuff like that, they should already be trained on these issues.
Not only because they're going to become seniors eventually, it's an inevitability. They should be advocating for seniors, and it's disappointing that we don't do it because the least acceptance percentages of LGBT are older populations. If you're 80, you have the least acceptance of LGBT. So this story brings and puts front and center in front of us that these seniors, especially those that need critical senior healthcare services, are going into facilities where they're the most rejected, which is very sad and why we must do better.
So this episode is called Queer in Care. How do we make healthcare spaces safer for queer patients, residents, clients, and staff? Why does it matter? Well, because there's a lot of us and we're in care, so it's obviously important to address that. What do our healthcare spaces look like presently for queer people? Atrocious, in my humble opinion, as both a queer person and a healthcare worker. Do current attitudes and practices present barriers to access in long-term care and acute care?
What's the difference between long-term and acute care?
So acute care is things like hospitals, places you stay less than 3 months, and long-term care is like special care homes, nursing homes, retirement homes, that kind of deal.
Cool.
Yeah. So in acute care, you have people of all different ages. Long-term care is usually restricted to the elderly, but there are some places in Saskatoon, for example, like Sherbrooke, where they do have young elders as well. So I'd like to start the episode by presenting a case study. I should state that the case studies in this episode are not based on real people, but they are sort of conglomerations of actual experiences of people in long-term care.
Yeah.
So every single point that I discuss is something that has happened and will happen again. So this is Effie and Louise. So Effie Schultz and Louise Goodman are both 84 and have been living together as a couple since 1986. Effie was married to a man earlier in her life and has one son, Chris, who is very supportive, and a daughter, Donna, who has never approved of or recognized Effie's relationship with Louise. Because she's a bitch. Yeah, she's a bitch. Louise has been single her whole life. Effie is her first official partner since coming out in her 40s. She has no children. Effie has just moved into long-term care due to recent falls and a self-care deficit. Prior to Effie entering long-term care, Louise was her primary caregiver, although Effie's son Chris has helped on weekends and has financially supported Effie and Louise. So move-in day. Effie has arrived at SHA Lakeview Special Care Home, which doesn't actually exist, we just made that up, via wheelchair taxi, accompanied by her son Chris and daughter Donna. To avoid conflict with Donna, Louise has traveled in her own vehicle.
Oh, that's sad.
It is sad. Chris wheels Effie into Lakeview's conference room, followed by Donna and Louise. They are welcomed in by resident care coordinator Wendy, who invites everyone to sit down and lays a stack of paper on the conference room table. Wendy, who is a registered psychiatric nurse, introduces herself and invites others to do the same. So the conflict begins. Chris introduces himself as Effie's son and primary power of attorney. Donna blurts out, "I'm her daughter, and this is her friend, Louise." Effie and Louise both lower their gaze from Donna. Wendy suspects Donna has hit on a sour note, but does not inquire further. "Louise is my partner," Effie declares loudly. Donna protests, "Effie and Louise are just friends." Emboldened, Louise declares, "Effie and I have been in a relationship for 37 years. We are life partners. Donna just doesn't believe in gay marriage." Donna retorts, "My mom and dad were married for 20 years. My mother isn't some kind of gay lesbian, and Louise is just her friend." So again, I've seen this happen.
That's wild.
This is real. Yeah.
That is denial to the max.
Imagine believing they're just roommates for 37 years.
Right?
It would make you a historian if
Yep.
it was like 100 years ago.
History will just call them roommates.
Yeah,
Or
and this
just
is
roommates, friends.
This is very common where an elderly person moving into long-term care has got more than one child taking care of them, and they have very differing views on how their elder parent should be treated. So, I mean, not just with issues of gender and sexual diversity, but all kinds of things like advance directives, all sorts of ethical decisions are often supported by one child, opposed by another. And some of the family infighting I've seen in long-term care is pretty ridiculously hostile. So the plot thickens. Wendy has found herself in a very uncomfortable position. SHA Lakeview has never welcomed an openly queer resident before and has no guidelines in place to assist with getting Effie moved in. This is uncharted territory for Wendy.
That seems stupid.
And
it's 2023.
Yeah, and there are no standards.
Wow. Currently there's no standards.
There are no standards for how to deal with gender and sexually diverse residents in long-term care.
What? Are there standards elsewhere in Canada for it?
So if we established standards, then we would be like pioneers.
We would be pioneering this. Yeah.
Okay, this would be something we've done, something innovative that we would be doing.
Yeah, because we're such a progressive province elsewhere.
One can hope that maybe one day we can be a progressive province.
I know that some, like right now, the onus is upon the educational systems to train their doctors and healthcare professionals to incorporate gender and sexual diversity and identity and cultural sensitivity into their care practices as they are training these care professionals. But yeah, no policies.
And the training programs you speak of are generally administered by retired registered nurses who've come back to teach. And so they're ancient themselves and have a lot of antiquated views on gender and sexual diversity.
Carmen, tell me about when you were younger. Did you have a partner?
Actually, I did.
I would love to see some photos, or if you have any.
Okay. She died about 4 years ago.
We stayed in the closet because of our jobs.
I was the director of a nonprofit social agency and fearful of being discovered at one point, you know.
Most of their life has probably been spent hiding in some capacity, whether it's from their landlord, their boss, their nosy neighbors, that it's, I imagine in some ways when you go to a facility, it's probably actually easier to hide than it is to be out, which is very different generationally.
Queer was a bad word when I was first coming out.
I had enough experience in my early life with people saying, hey, he's a queer. That stuff right there, that experience of the hatred that was behind that. The word's very loaded from back in those years.
It was done in a demeaning manner to make someone feel less than a human being. But I'm glad that the young people took that word and turned it around.
They need to show support and show that they are a caring, safe facility
which in turn means that if you do have trouble there, that there's someone that will step in and help you with that trouble.
There's a lot of great programs that have been done. There are stickers that say this is an LGBT safe place, putting it in the windows prominently, really starting conversations with staff, also with other residents, maybe showing a documentary around Stonewall or the Compton cafeteria riots. There's great movies to provide residents with a sense that this is part of our population.
First thing I would say is people that are identifying in any of the LGBT need to have someone that's non-judgmental, how the care is given. Because there can be a subconscious bias against someone that could result in care that isn't as genuine or as delicate.
Folks say, you know what, I don't care what they do in their bedroom is their own thing. I think that completely diminishes them, and I think it also really highlights that when we think about LGBT seniors or LGBT folks in general, we get really stuck on a very small part of their relationship.
I always want to expand the conversation from how's sex going, or what do you do with sex, or what. That is such a small part of what our relationship is about.
Stop acting like a weirdo. You're scaring people.
I'm not a weirdo. Leave me alone.
You think it's normal to dress like that?
Yes, actually.
Oh, really?
Billy, that's not cool. Lee is a human being just like anyone with feelings and deserves respect. Can you come with me for a minute? Billy, please remember our rules. No one gets bullied or disrespected, okay?
But
Lee is entitled to express her gender just like you. Now, I know this won't happen again, but I have to let the director know what just happened so it's in your file. We protect everyone here.
Well, that's the interesting thing about like the unequal infrastructure that society is building for gender and sexual diverse people. Public schools for quite a few years now have had supports for gender and sexual diverse people for, I don't know, that started nearly 50 years ago in some places, and it's become fairly standard in North American public schools. I should say Canadian. And then when you get into your work life, many workplaces are starting to have those same things offered. But then suddenly when you get into the retirement home, those outreaches stop. It's not like gay people started to appear 1 or 2 generations ago. They've been here the whole time. So it's strange that we stopped building that infrastructure to help LGBT people, like at the retirement home.
Yeah.
The LGBT outreach at public schools and at workplaces, it's not thorough. It's not a blanket coverage. It's like Swiss cheese. But there are many public schools that have that outreach, and there are many workplaces that have that outreach, a good percentage of them. But when you reach the retirement homes, the long-term care facilities, suddenly the percentage of outreach for seniors that may be queer drops drastically.
And there are 2 things we do very poorly in long-term care. One of them, as I'll go into further in this episode, is dealing with gender and sexual diversity. And the other is treating mental health issues, particularly in residents who have a diagnosis of dementia. A lot of folks with dementia also exhibit symptoms of depression and anxiety. And we tend to treat both of those with anxiolytics and sedative hypnotics, which is problematic because we're taking people who otherwise have vibrant lives. Yes, they have memory issues, sometimes have behavioral issues, but these folks are not treated with antidepressants or with anxiolytics. We just treat them with sedative hypnotics, put them to sleep, sedate them so they can't fight back. And this is how people live and die in long-term care in this province, completely going without any sort of mental health assessment on move-in and without any mental health treatment during their time living in long-term care.
Mm-hmm. I know disabled adults that spent long periods of time in a mental health crisis facility in the city, and they spent most of their time there chemically restrained.
Chemically restrained.
Chemically restrained. And otherwise, when they got out, all it would take is somebody with a little bit of patience and empathy to help them live an active, enriching life. But oftentimes when they're stuck in these facilities, they don't have that empathy and patience, so they're just chemically restrained.
Yeah. And that's completely true. Wendy excuses herself from the room and tracks down LPN Ryan, who is an openly gay man. Wendy asks Ryan to sit in on the admission conference to provide guidance. So what special considerations and accommodations will Wendy have to make in order to safely welcome Effie and to allow private visitation for Louise? So this is something that I see all the time in long-term care, is that heterosexual couples, say it's a woman living in long-term care, a husband coming to visit, there are places where they can be alone. There are places where they can explore sexual expression. But if it was a same-sex couple, that just wouldn't be available.
What?
Because the assumption when you move into long-term care is that you're straight. That's it. So many queer seniors are forced back into the closet when they go into long-term care. And you can imagine people in their 80s and 90s who've spent their entire fucking lives fighting for equity and equality only to get it shoved back in the fucking closet when they're too old to protest.
That's fucked.
Yeah. So considerations and accommodations. Will Effie be comfortable sharing a room with another heterosexual woman if a private room isn't available? Will a heterosexual woman and her family be comfortable sharing a room with an openly queer woman? Can Louise challenge Chris and Donna's power of attorney status in light of the fact that Effie and Louise are legally common law? How will the staff react to an openly queer resident? What will LPN Ryan's role be in supporting Effie? Will Effie and Louise be comfortable displaying affection in front of other residents, staff, and families? Can a private space be made available for Effie and Louise to spend intimate time together when Louise visits? And if Louise ever requires long-term care placement, will CPAS, which is Client and Patient Access Services, send her to live at SHA Lakeview with Effie, or are the two of them going to be split up?
They'd split them up.
They'd split them up. Yeah.
Do they split up heterosexual couples?
Nope. As much as they possibly can, they put heterosexual couples together, and they always put them on waiting lists to be transferred into the same facility if it's not available on admission.
Jesus.
Is this universal for homosexual couples? Or what if they're married? Because marriage is legal in Canada. If they're legally married, do they still separate them?
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
They would.
What?
Yeah.
How's that legal?
Well, because there's no legal requirement to put same-sex couples together. It's a guideline, but not a policy.
Right.
And so it's very easy for managers at the top to simply treat it as a practice rather than a policy.
Yeah.
And this is something that we are looking to change to ensure that same-sex couples do stick together after they've been admitted to long-term care.
Well, yeah, their accommodations would be exactly the same as any other married couple.
Exactly.
I don't see why.
And again, it's because facilities, long-term care facilities, SHA Lakeview included, have the right to refuse admissions. So if they go through a person's case report and, for example, that resident has got a history of violence and the facility isn't set up with a locked unit, for example, the director of care of that care home can say, no, we won't take that client.
Yeah.
And so the director of care, if they're, a conservative Christian or whatever, and a lot of care homes in Saskatoon are supported or sponsored by religious denominations, that director of care could also say no to keeping a same-sex couple together.
So most of our long-term care homes are religiously funded then?
A lot of them, yeah. Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah. Including our 2 palliative care units where you cannot access medical assistance in dying because they're Catholic run as well.
It reminds me of how early court cases used to be ran. Like, when you would select a jury, in the early days of the legal system, lawyers would be able to openly say, I strike this man from the jury because he's black. That's the reason he had to give. And eventually there was an infrastructure and regulations put in where you couldn't just reject people from juries openly. It still happens. But in retirement homes, the rejections can just be made because there's no regulations or guidelines or oversight. You can just reject somebody for being gay.
Yeah, and the DOC would never have to say, I rejected them because they're gay. It's like, I rejected them because they've got behavioral issues and we don't have a locked unit, or find some bullshit excuse. They have a lot of power.
Yeah.
So continuing on with considerations and accommodations, what will happen if Effie ever loses capacity? Will Chris and Donna continue to be substitute decision makers, or does SHA Lakeview's administrator have an ethical or legal obligation to assist with making Louise Effie's substitute decision maker? And this is something else we see in same-sex couples, is that even though they may be legally common law or legally married, their spouse loses status as a substitute decision maker, and that's either passed on to the children or to the province.
Yeah. And I assume that doesn't happen with straight.
No. No, it doesn't. In the event of Effie's sudden illness or collapse, which family members will be informed? Does Louise have the right to information? And again, this is a director of care can decide to completely exclude a same-sex partner in keeping them in the loop. How can SHA Lakeview make itself more welcoming to sexual and gender diverse minority residents? And is gender and/or sexual diversity grounds for rehoming a resident to a more progressive facility? So at SHA Lakeview, as I've presented it, is a fairly conservative facility. So is the fact that Effie is gay grounds to move her to someplace like Sherbrooke, where they have an annual gay pride parade and gender and sexually diverse elders are celebrated? I mean, is that a good enough reason to move Effie to Sherbrooke? And I would argue yes, because I think it's a lot easier to rehome one resident than to try to change the culture at an entire facility. That said, of course, we need to change the culture in these facilities, but I would suggest that sexual and gender diversity should be grounds for moving someone to a more progressive location.
Yeah, so they're more comfortable in their, twilight years.
Exactly.
There was a serious lack of facilities, care homes, assisted living programs for LGBT seniors. Where are the care homes, assisted living spaces for us, the LGBT seniors? I spent most of my childhood in Regina, Saskatchewan, not known for being the safest place for an obviously gay child. I was bashed, harassed, and abused all through public and high school by students, teachers, strangers, and my own family. Our generation came from a time where our sexuality was illegal and there were dire punishments if you ever found out. Things have improved, but not enough. There are no proper residences or care facilities for us. None. And this is criminal. Where are we supposed to go? Where we will be safe, respected, and cared for and about. There aren't enough spaces available for straight people, let alone any marginalized groups. And a lot of these spaces are pricey. A big majority of LGBT seniors do not have a lot of money, especially if we're dependent on low pensions. The facilities for profits are not interested in low-income residents. Their focus is to make money, bottom line. I can't go through the nightmare again of not feeling safe or allowed to be myself. That is a seriously toxic situation and not what any human should have to put up with or deal with, especially when you're old. These places have to be affordable, healthy, and fun living spaces so we have dignity. Hate is not dignity. I cannot nor will I ever tolerate haters anymore. Please, please consider what I've talked about and work to make change happen. Too many suicides happen in our community for many of the reasons I've mentioned. But when things feel hopeless and with no end in sight, it seems to be a solution. This must stop, and stop now. Thank you.
Is there a measurement or some sort of official criteria which determines whether, rates how progressive a facility is?
No.
No?
No.
I guess, how do you move them to a facility if there's no criteria to determine what is progressive and what is...
Sherbrooke and Central Haven, both in Saskatoon, subscribe to what's called the Eden Alternative, which is a model for long-term care that centers around the wholeness of the resident and provides holistic care in a not just resident-centered, but resident-directed manner. So in intake, we find out what the priorities are for that resident, and we work actively to make sure that they're fulfilled spiritually, emotionally, physically, sexually, etc. And that doesn't generally exist outside of the Eden Alternative. The Eden Alternative has its flaws. It's an imperfect system. Staff members have to wear plain clothes. Care aides, who under any other facility wouldn't have to do this, are required to prepare meals and give out medications. So it's a little bit different system to work under. And like I said, it's not perfect, but it's vastly superior to what we're doing in the majority of our homes. Sherbrooke has embraced the Eden Alternative for years. Central Haven just came on board a couple of years ago, and they're still working toward full certification under the Eden Alternative. But it is a better model for care, particularly for sexually and gender minority people.
Could you give a short explanation of what it's like in a typical facility as contrast to Sherbrooke?
At SHA Lakeview, which again is a fictitious facility, but I made it up as a conglomerate of different facilities I've worked in, it sucks. It's a shitty place to go to die. recreation is very limited in what they're able to do. Sherbrooke, for example, has an art program where they have elders, and under the Eden Alternative, we don't call them residents, clients, or patients. We call them elders to respect the fact that they know more about themselves than we as healthcare workers do, which is a progressive model. Under the Eden Alternative, they go to the art therapy room and they roll their wheelchairs through wet paint and then drive their wheelchairs across canvases to make paintings that are then displayed and auctioned in the healthcare facility to raise money for the recreation department.
That sounds awesome.
It sounds fucking awesome. They have an aviary with parrots and shit. They've got cats roaming the building all the time. So pet therapy is really big for them. And that's something that we just don't do a good job of in non-Eden Alternative.
And a wheelchair accessible, heated above ground pool.
They've actually got better bathtubs that don't require you to hang someone naked over it while you lower them into the tub. They have like wheelchair roll-in tubs and shit.
Yeah, I visit Sherbrooke a couple times a week as part of my employment, and it's a very well thought out facility.
It's a well thought out facility, and if you just look at people's faces, and when by people I mean both the elders and the staff, don't they just look like they love what they're doing?
Yeah.
And when you go into a non-Eden facility, everyone looks tired and impatient and rushed. And the residents' needs are not fully met. The staff needs are not fully met. The overturn rate of staff is higher in non-Eden facilities.
Yeah.
Like I know people who've worked at Sherbrooke under Eden for decades and they would never leave because they fucking love it there.
Yeah.
I have been to facilities where they are kind of part way into Eden. Like they have a better rec program. They have, a couple of gardens, both outdoor and indoor. And they do have their roll-in tubs as well. And they've got some really good staff on board, but they also have some more conservative views in terms of other things.
Nursing homes were always modeled after hospitals, very cleanly and very sterile and very boring. We didn't like the boring. We liked it to be fun.
So Tioga's administrator, Maria Landy, convinced her board of directors to try something she'd heard about, an experimental program called the Eden Alternative.
It was a total change in philosophy, a change in treatment, and a change in values. Philosophy is that a nursing home is not a place to go to die, but a place to go and have help with living. In terms of values, we value the seniors and their quality of life.
You want to play with her a minute, Rika?
It's not like the animals aren't in a certain place. They're everywhere. We have one dog that knows how to operate the elevator now.
At first, there were a lot of concerns, particularly among staff members like nursing assistant Patricia Middahl.
There were a lot of us that thought it was crazy in the beginning. I was afraid people tripping on animals and things like that more than anything. And a lot of people are afraid of cats jumping on them and things, but they seem to adapt it very well.
It's more homier with plants and the pets. Of course, pets are nice for a lot of them. They love to pet them, love them.
I used to have a dog, as long as I can remember my boyhood. And without a dog, it wasn't a home.
Besides the cats and dogs and birds, Tioga is also home to giant rabbits, a pot-bellied pig who lives in the physical therapy unit, a pet chinchilla who likes to snuggle.
Nice. Look who's here, Harold.
And there are even visitors like Nutmeg, a Shetland pony who still makes house calls.
Gosh, hi there.
Even if she does have a tendency to stick her nose where it doesn't belong.
What's his name? Ow.
96-year-old Harold Amrine says it's given him a reason to go on.
I thought I'd never make it. I thought I'd die. I said I never would go to a nursing home. All the activities they have here is terrific. We can't go wrong. You could recommend this to a millionaire.
The seniors were not only happier, they were also living longer.
If I had a drug that could do that, the world would be beating a path to my door. But this isn't a drug. This is an idea or an approach to genuine care.
And it wasn't only the death rate that dropped. The use of medications dropped substantially as well.
The problem wasn't that these people were under-medicated, it's that they were over-medicated and had too little companionship. I think companionship is the crucial missing link in these people's daily lives.
So the aftermath. It's been 2 months since Effie moved into SHA Lakeview. SHA Lakeview has appointed LPN Ryan its gender and sexual diversity lead. he has been tasked with creating and developing training materials in services to staff and management. So that's huge. My humble suggestion is that every long-term care facility should have a gender and sexual diversity lead who is tasked with making sure that it's a safe space for queer people.
I don't think they should be forced into the role.
They shouldn't be forced into the role, but for example, in the home I work in, I would love to be the sexual and gender diversity lead. And I think I do a solid job of it.
So how would you counter like tokenism in that kind of a role?
I don't know that you would necessarily need to, because like there are 3 out queer people in my workplace. I'm one of them. Neither of the other 2 are really out, like they don't put it on display. I don't think you would have to worry about that. And then it would also be up to the sexual and gender diversity lead how much they put themselves out there.
What about in terms of like you're talking about developing training? How would that work with the rest of their day-to-day job? Like, would there be specific time allocated to them to develop that?
Yeah, so it would be a part-time position that's added on. So they may have to introduce someone from the outside, maybe a staff member who's already there, but I think hours should be created for this position.
I did count in Saskatoon, there are 14 facilities. Of those 14, 8 of them are absolutely religious facilities. 6 are not, and of those 6, 2 of them I'm not sure. Just because they don't say anything, but they feel pretty religious. One's Porteous Lodge. Doesn't say anything, but it's owned by like a big conglomerate that has some weird
By
stuff.
Jubilee Residences?
Yeah. So I don't think they're religious, but they aren't. Some of them for sure are. St. Joseph's Home.
Yep.
St. Anne's Home.
Yep.
Sunnyside Adventist Care Center.
Yep.
Save a lot of beer.
Samaritan Place.
Samaritan Place is a Catholic facility.
Luther Special Care Home, which is a giant cross right in the front door.
Yep.
I will give a shout out to St. Joseph, was it?
Yeah.
I did some maintenance work there once, replacing a couple pumps, and the nuns made us baking. It was lovely.
Oh, lovely.
The vast majority of the residents didn't look like they were having a good time at all.
No, they look pretty bored and depressed.
Yeah, just mostly wheeled out into a big room and left in the sun.
Yep, that's how it works.
That's how you get prunes.
So after 3 weeks in a shared room with a friendly and accepting roommate, Effie was moved to a private room. Chris brings Louise to visit Effie on weekends, and Effie and Louise have video chats daily, facilitated by Lakeview's Recreation Department. As June, Pride Month, approaches, the Recreation and Care staff plan SHA Lakeview's first annual Pride Parade and Pride Week activities. Residents and staff decorate Lakeview's accessible bus and enter it as a float in Saskatoon's Pride Parade, and 14 residents participate in the parade.
Nice.
More aftermath. Effie's story has a happy ending. With the assistance of SHA Lakeview's administrator, Effie and Louise's lawyer makes the necessary applications to have Louise appointed as Effie's substitute decision maker. After several years of declining health, Louise moves into a shared room at SHA Lakeview with Effie. The couple spends their last years together, with Chris still visiting every weekend. At the age of 92, Effie and Louise are legally married in a small ceremony at SHA Lakeview.
Aww.
2 weeks apart, at the age of 96, Effie and Louise pass away peacefully at SHA Lakeview and are buried beside each other in a local cemetery. LPN Ryan gives their eulogies. Chris and Donna both attend their funerals. But Effie and Louise are outliers in the queer community, and not all stories have happy endings. So I'm going to take a quick break here to crack myself another beer, because shit's going to get dark.
You can have mine.
Have yours.
Yeah, now that it's had some time to marinate, I think that's a perfect, post mowing the lawn beer.
Yeah.
Post Malone beer? What?
Sure.
Post mowing Malone beer? Malone beer?
Okay.
I don't know. I'm trying to make something of it.
Carrying on.
It's a dark time, okay?
Okay.
This is the second case study. So this is Pat Scharf, a case study. And again, doesn't really exist, but made up of elements of people who do actually exist. So all of the points in the PowerPoint here are people and events that have occurred. Pat Scharf, a case study. Patrick Scharf, who goes by Pat, is a 60-year-old non-binary person with severe schizoaffective disorder. Schizoaffective disorder is a mental health disorder that is marked by a combination of schizophrenia symptoms, such as hallucinations or delusions, and mood disorder symptoms, such as depression or mania. Pat was assigned male at birth and lived as a straight cisgender man until their late 30s, at which point they privately identified as pansexual and agender, but was never out of the closet. Pat spent their entire adult life in and out of psychiatric hospitalization for treatment of their mental health issues. At the age of 60, Pat was sent to live at SHA Lakeview Special Care Home. They have no next of kin, and their substitute decision maker is their social worker, Jennifer. Move-in day. Pat was brought to SHA Lakeview Special Care Home by non-emergency ambulance. During transport, Pat was put into Pinnell restraints after becoming severely agitated when leaving the Dubé Center for Mental Health. They had been receiving intramuscular antipsychotics and sedative hypnotics at Dubé and wasn't responding well to oral meds. Upon arriving at SHA Lakeview, Pat was given an injection of Halidol, and their restraints were removed after they calmed down. Pat's social worker, Jennifer, arrived shortly thereafter. Pat's admission conference began with the resident care coordinator, Wendy, leading the session. Wendy, a registered psychiatric nurse, was skeptical that Lakeview was the right place for Pat, but a bed had opened up and the CPAS gave it to Pat. Pat's medications were reviewed, notes were made about their urinary incontinence and food preferences, as well as what recreational activities they enjoyed, which was mostly watching golf on TV.
See you, Bubba.
But no one asked Pat about their sexual orientation or gender identity. There were sections in their admission package on languages spoken and religions practiced, but nothing about what genders they were attracted to or if they even identified as a man. Due to their sedatives, Pat was largely nonverbal during the admission. Jennifer did her best to fill in the blanks based on what discharge notes from Dubé had indicated, which wasn't much. Pat was moved into a shared room with another resident, a large, heterosexual man whom Pat feared. Pat had been sexually assaulted as a teenager, and this resident reminded Pat of their assailant. Pat had a very shy bladder and was unable to use a urinal in front of their roommate, which led to them being catheterized against their will for urinary retention. All of Pat's official documents listed them as being male, but they weren't. They were agender. The staff used he/him pronouns with Pat, but Pat knew themselves as they/them. Pat was primarily attracted to men, and at one point a friend brought them a gay pornography magazine. The wife of Pat's roommate found the magazine and reported it to the director of care. The woman called Pat a freak and a faggot, words Pat had heard so many times before. That night, Pat's roommate violently assaulted them. The aftermath. Pat's story doesn't have a happy ending. Pat lived at SHA Lakeview for 461 days before their death from starvation after they gave up and stopped eating. Pat had been bullied by staff and other residents. Many staff called them a flamer, like they'd been called in elementary and high school. With no next of kin, there was no money for Pat's funeral. They were buried in common ground with a small numbered stone marker in the civic cemetery. Pat died broken and alone. Their story didn't have to end this way. Any thoughts on Pat?
That sounds absolutely hellish.
And it's real. There are 3 residents I've dealt with over the past 12 years who come to mind as being Pat Sharfs, and I've taken bits of their stories to create Pat.
Yeah, pretty much right from being completely nonverbal while you're being signed into a living arrangement that you're going to be living for the rest of your days in, to just being completely disrespected and bullied at every turn.
And by like the staff that are supposed to be there to keep you safe.
Yeah. And death by starvation after someone gives up hope is common in long-term care. A lot of folks I know would live a lot longer if their lives were happier.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like if it was an accepting facility, then proper record keeping would give them the information they need to stand behind Pat. But the facility wasn't accepting even after they found out that they were gay.
Yeah.
Like they were fucked from both ends.
So the Ministry of Health of Saskatchewan requirements for care plans states that they must address the resident's social needs, but the social needs listed in the actual care plan are limited to recreation and heritage. There needs to be an inclusion of sexual orientation and gender identity. By excluding these categories, we make the assumption that every resident is straight and cisgender. Now, depending on what survey you consult, between 3 and 10% of Canadians are queer, so between 3 and 10% of our residents are queer as well.
Yeah.
But we completely discount that. So My Plan 1.1 is a document that is completed when a resident is admitted to long-term care. As I said, it contains info boxes for heritage and recreational activities, but nothing about sexual orientation and gender identity. It is my personal opinion that My Plan 1.1 should be updated to include this vital information. And this fall, the friend I know is going to be making this presentation to the Ministry of Health. So the care plan itself, My Plan 1.1, specifically states the following in point 1.2.3 care plans. Quote, special care homes shall ensure that each resident has an appropriate, comprehensive, and individualized care plan developed upon arrival in collaboration with a multidisciplinary team. The resident and their most responsible person shall be included in the care plan development. Using the outcomes from the assessment, the care plan must address a resident's physical, psychological, spiritual, cultural, and social needs and corresponding goals. We're going to get this changed. This is like, pay attention to the news because change is coming and I'm pissed.
And if you live elsewhere and the place where you live also does not have safe policy for us queer folk, consider helping to contribute to making some changes in your own healthcare systems where you live so that as we get old, we all have a safe space.
Yeah. So in conclusion, we as healthcare workers will be instrumental in moving society to a place where it is welcoming to everyone, including gender and sexual minorities. What steps can we take today to make our healthcare spaces safe for queer patients, residents, clients, and staff? In our training programs for healthcare workers, and I trained as a care aide 13 years ago, there was nothing in my training course about gender and sexual diversity. I mean, everything I know about queer people in care has been from working with them directly and research I've done on my own. I also took 2 years of practical nursing, and at no point during that program was there any mention of dealing with patients who are gender and sexually diverse.
That's wild.
So like getting into the training programs and starting that kind of shit is a big deal. And then also I support the existence of gender and sexual diversity leads at each hospital, inpatient wards, and includes long-term care.
Mm-hmm.
Were queer residents consulted in the development of this presentation?
I can neither confirm nor deny that.
It's a fun mystery. Yeah, I think that in the course of being trained for their positions, staff should have to learn about that stuff, both in their institution as well as when they get hired.
Yeah, and we should have more power to fire bigots.
Yeah.
Like directors of care and administrators of these homes should be firing people who are bullying residents. Like that shit's completely unacceptable.
Yeah, it wouldn't fly like at any other place.
No, like if I as a queer person, I'm bisexual and non-binary. If I moved into long-term care today, the home SHA Lakeview that I've mentioned, I would be back in the closet so goddamn fast because there's no way in hell they'd be able to support me and I'd be bullied to death, guaranteed. And that's what happens every fucking day.
And then the families that do advocate for their family members, they have to fight really hard to get their loved ones moved into more accepting and safe spaces. And there just aren't enough. There aren't enough available.
No, like we were trying to get we were looking at getting my Baba into Sherbrooke, and the waiting list is like 100 years long.
How about, I guess, residents or patients who are not prepared to be out or are only kind of semi-out? Is there any sort of consideration to be made for that?
I would advocate for one-on-one counseling confidentially with the sexual and gender diversity lead, because there's nothing wrong with interviewing a resident one-on-one and saying, hey, like, do you want to be out? Can we help you come out? Would you care to stay in the closet and we can support you from there? But these are conversations that should be had, not avoided.
But I assume that there used to be at some point, or the caring thing to do for somebody who was queer was to make sure that there was no outing of anyone ever, right? But that's not allowing people to live in a healthy way. What we should do is just create safe, accepting spaces.
So they are comfortable to come out.
So they are comfortable to come out and be out.
There should be no doubt that a facility is queer-friendly if it's queer-friendly.
Wellesley Central Place, an assisted living facility in Toronto, just steps from the city's church in Wellesley Village, has opened what it calls the Rainbow Wing, believed to be the first in North America. The wing is the first of two planned by Rakai Centers, the company that operates the home. The wing will accommodate anyone who wants to live in it, with space for up to 25 at a time.
People get to be who they are in long-term care.
I think it's really important to connect the two generations together so that the younger generation doesn't take for granted how hard and how much our seniors had to really fight.
Giving a choice to people to be able to be part of a community within a floor is really important. I'm gay, and my partner Renee and I have been together for 14 years. And when I came out to my mom, she told me she was bi. And so she came out to me when I came out to her.
Residents suffering from dementia who are from the community need that extra TLC. And this is a place where they can come and feel included based on the culture, the visuals around them.
When creating sort of a space that's specific to a particular community, there's always the concern that there's going to be a separateness there. Is there something either inherent about long-term living or something that you're doing to prevent that from happening?
Of course. So our entire home is an inclusive home. It's not a separate unit. It's not a unit that's locked. It's an open wing, and it's open for everyone.
I have one resident who used to be a drag queen in their former life before coming here, and they feel comfortable in talking to staff and other residents about it.
You know, it's a great thing, especially if you put it into the context of what is going on in the rest of the world. The rest of the world seems to be going the other way, I'm sorry to say, but you know, if we're being honest about this, that's what's going on.
We work together and we help each other. If you break a leg, somebody goes shopping for you. That's just the way lesbians are. We really do stick together. And I had a bone marrow transplant. I had chemo 3 times. So I know what it's like to be sick. And this is such a tight-knit community that I never had to worry about a ride for chemo, picking up, dropping off. Everybody worked together.
Toronto Mayor John Tory also attending Saturday afternoon, speaking as the event got underway.
These are individual human beings with all their own individual attributes and wonderful characteristics. And even in our own city-operated long-term care homes, we've moved to something called emotion-centered care, which is to treat people very much as an individual, not a number and not a room number or a chart, but a person. And I think this is going to allow people to be themselves and to, especially at the latter stages of their life.
That was a really good episode. I didn't realize it was that bad that outreach to queer people just stops at a point, you know?
Well, and I mean, there are allies and queer folks out there doing their best.
Yeah.
But the system is not for them, it's against them.
Yeah.
And that needs to change.
For Occultae Veritatis podcast, my name is Leon Filger, along with
Sage Murray,
Richard Bigley,
Ood Gallifrey,
the soundboard team,
and joining us in studio,
Don Kessler.
And Don Kessler.
Good night.
Playing us out this episode, all the way back from 1927, we have Me and My Shadow from Whispering Jack Smith.
Shades of night are falling and I'm lonely, standing on the corner, oh so blue. Sweethearts having fun, pass me one by one. Guess I'll wind up like I always do, with only me and my shadow strolling down the avenue. Me and my shadow, not a soul to tell our troubles to. And when it's 12 o'clock, we climb the stair. We never knock, for nobody's there. Just me and my shadow, all alone and oh so blue. When the sun sets on the far horizon and the parlor lamps begin to glow, Jim and Jack and John put their slippers on. They're all set, but we're still on the go. So lonely, me and my shadow, strolling down the avenue. Me and my shadow, not a soul to tell our troubles to. When I go out at night with my old pal, We never fight about any gal, just me and my shadow, all alone and oh so blue. And when it's 12 o'clock, we climb the stairs. We never knock, for nobody's there, just me and my shadow, all alone and oh so blue.
I'll see you next week for some more interesting bullshit.